Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir le président directeur général de WCIT 2012. Please welcome the Chief Executive Officer of WCIT 2012, Monsieur François Morin.
Alors, distingués invités, pardon. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, bienvenue à ce déjeuner-conférence organisé par la Chambre de commerce de Montréal métropolitain dans le cadre du Congrès mondial des technologies de l'information 2012. Je me présente, ce qui a déjà été fait. Je suis François Morin, président directeur général du WCIT, et je serai ce midi votre maître de cérémonie. Je vous demanderai, si ce n'est pas déjà fait, de bien vouloir mettre vos téléphones cellulaires en mode silencieux et de les garder ainsi pendant toute la durée de la présentation. Vous êtes toutefois invités à commenter la conférence d'aujourd'hui sur Twitter en utilisant le mot « clic » CCMMQCCA. If you haven't already done so, please turn your cell phones to silent for the entire presentation. Your cooperation in this regard would be greatly appreciated. You are, however, invited to discuss today's conference on Twitter using the hashtag CCMMQCCA. De plus, par souci de votre sécurité, veuillez noter dès maintenant l'emplacement des sorties de secours dans cette salle. En cas d'une évacuation d'urgence, écoutez attentivement les instructions et suivez le personnel des banquets qui vous indiquera la sortie la plus proche. J'ai maintenant le plaisir de vous présenter les invités qui composent votre table d'honneur. I would ask our guests to please stand up as their names are called, and I would ask the participants to withhold their applause until the end of the presentation. Président et chef de la direction de la Chambre, Michel Leblanc. Président et chef de la direction 8D Technologies, Madame Isabelle Bété. Directeur général, École de technologie supérieure, grand partenaire de la Chambre, Monsieur Yves Beauchamp. Présidente fondatrice, Société des arts technologiques, Madame Monique Savoie. Président and CEO, Information Technology Association of Canada, Mr. Karna Gupta. Directeur recherche, Ericsson Canada, grand partenaire de la Chambre, Monsieur Pierre Boucher. Directrice générale Techno Montréal, Madame Lydia Divry. Directeur de la communication numérique et information stratégique, Cabinet des relations publiques nationales et grand partenaire de la Chambre, Bruno Guglielminetti. Je m'excuse, Bruno. Président et Chief Executive Officer, Toom Boone Animation, Miss Joan Vojolesang. Président Astral Media, affichage, grand partenaire de la Chambre et premier vice-président du Conseil de la Chambre, M. Luc Sabatini. Présidente Bang Marketing et membre du Conseil de la Chambre, Mme Stephanie Keenan. Vice-président et chef de studio Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment, grand partenaire de la Chambre, M. Martin Carrier. Président directeur général, Conseil des relations internationales de Montréal, M. Pierre Lemonde. Président directeur général, Palais des congrès de Montréal, grand partenaire de la Chambre, M. Marc Tremblay. Président du Conseil de la Chambre du groupe Conseil Res Publica et de Molson Coors Brewing Company, grand partenaire de la Chambre, M. Andrew Molson. Merci. J'ai maintenant le plaisir d'inviter M. Michel Leblanc, président et chef de la direction de la Chambre, à venir vous adresser quelques mots.
Distingués invités de la table d'honneur, membres de la Chambre, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, dear guests, thank you for being in Montreal. Merci beaucoup d'être ici. C'est un grand honneur pour la Chambre de commerce et pour Montréal d'être associé à cet événement. D'abord pour Montréal d'être l'hôte du congrès WCIT 2012, qui a pour objectif de créer un plan d'action pour une société numérique mondiale, et pour la Chambre de commerce du Montréal métropolitain d'être associé à cet événement ce midi, qui pour nous est, à l'exemple de ce qu'on tente de faire, un rapprochement entre les spécialistes, la communauté d'affaires, les gens du milieu. C'est un honneur, mais ce n'est pas un hasard si le WCIT a lieu à Montréal. It's directly linked, I presume, to the strength of Montreal in information technology. We have a very strong cluster in this city. Et Techno Montréal, this cluster, has various projects. One of this project is to do an initiative called Montréal Métropole Numérique that has an objective, clearly, as anyone would notice, to put numeric strength in the city, de mettre Montréal à l'ère du numérique. If we succeed, we hope we will, then we will part of those smart cities across the world, and we suspect that this should happen soon. Projects are already on the way. Now, of course, when we host this event, it's part of a continuum. Last year at this podium, we had Patrick Pichette from Google, Chris Hughes, one of the co-founders of Facebook, and Biz Stone, one of the co-founders of Twitter. Well, in brief, last year, we were told that we should put our act together, that our entrepreneurs here would have to move quicker, and that there was huge rewards if we were successful. At this moment, I'm pleased to say that at least one CEO in this town has moved ahead, and that's the person speaking here. Last year, I described the city saying there was two types of people here. There were the tech-savvy entrepreneurs and the old dinosaurs, and I was one of them. And that was because I was not even on Twitter. I did not know how to tweet. Actually, Twitter for me was like, in French we say a tweet is someone who's a bit stupid. So that was when I was young, actually. Now, we all understand that now a tweeter is someone who's savvy. And I'm very pleased to announce this year that the dinosaur has evolved and that man has arrived, and I'm tweeting now. So if I'm representative of this city, if someone like me could do it, what I'm saying here is I'm suspecting that thousands of entrepreneurs, young and older, are moving forward, and they are now, of course, consuming online, but consuming mobile. They're starting to pay mobile. They're starting to get information mobile whenever they buy something, so they can compare in real time what they're buying, the price, and everything. Well, the point is we're moving real time towards mobile life, mobile technologies. And I thought today, and I'm going to stop here, I thought today I would learn what my challenge for next year will be. So I'm very pleased to be hosting this event today with the WCIT. And without further ado, Mr. Morin, if you'd like to introduce our guests for this lunch. Thank you very much.
Alors, Monsieur Leblanc, merci beaucoup. Alors, mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Larry King and his guests.
Prove it's me. Thank you very much. What a warm and wonderful day this is in this beautiful city. It's my honor to moderate this panel. Now, the object here is to inform us more about the digital empire, the digital future. We have 9 outstanding panelists. 4 of them are here, and 5 of them will be coming to us by satellite. So as a moderator, I will ask questions of each of the guests, and then hopefully we'll have some combined discussions with all of them, even though that's difficult, with 5 away and 4 here. Let me introduce them first. To my left, your right, Kevin Crull is president of Bell Media. Bell Media is Canada's premier multimedia company with leading assets in television, radio, and digital. Sitting next to him is Ivo Ivanovski. He is Minister of Information Society and Administration for the Republic of Macedonia. Over here is Philippe Kridelka. Philippe is Director of UNESCO, the United Nations mission to contribute to the building of peace, the eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and intercultural dialogue through education, the sciences, culture, communication, and information. And next to him is quite a young man. He is Nathan Muema Masuko. He is the World Summit Youth Award winner of 2012 and Business Development Manager of Afro's company in Kenya. Since this young man wins this year's award, he is since 2005, he selects and promotes best practices in e-content and serves as a platform for young people from around the world who use the internet and mobiles to put the UN Millennium Development Goals into action. This year's winner, Nathan, has created a mobile game series called Haki, meaning rights or justice in Swahili. This phone game is not only fun, but carries a message to protect the environment. This is Nathan. He's this year's winner. Now, joining us by satellite is Mark Aboud, the Managing Director of SAP Canada. Operating in the Canadian market since 1989, SAP Systems, Applications and Products and Data Processing has the mission to help companies of all sizes and industries run better. As a market leader in enterprise applications, software, SAP applications and services enable more than 109,000 customers worldwide to operate profitably, adapt continuously, and grow sustainably. Brian David Johnson of Futurist Intel Corporation. Intel designs and builds the essential technologies that serve as the foundation for the world's computing devices. Robert Kahn is co-inventor of the Internet. He's responsible. President and CEO, Corporation for National Research Initiatives. The Corporation for NRI is a not-for-profit organization formed to undertake, foster, and promote research in the public interest. Vivek Ranadive is founder and CEO of Tibco Software. This is the leading independent provider of infrastructure software, creating an event-enabled enterprises to use on-premises or as part of a cloud computing environments. And finally, Carlos Slim Domit. He is chairman of the board of Telmex, Grupo Carso, and Grupo Sanborns, and co-chairman of America Mobile. You have personally built one of the world's largest and most successful. He has personally built one of the world's most largest and successful telecommunications companies. I'll have questions for each of the panelists, and we'll open up for some discussion as well. You see those who are not with us and those who are here. We'll start with Kevin Crull. Kevin, the digital revolution has shaken up the content industries perhaps more than any other industry, with consumers able to access content like never before from a staggering diversity of media channels. How has this shift transformed the way Bell Media addresses the marketplace?
Well, thanks, Larry. One thing it hasn't done is it hasn't assured that we'd have hockey in October here in Montreal, so that's the one thing it hasn't been able to fix yet. No question, the media industry is shaken, just like the music industry was years ago, and the telecom industry by IP technology. And I think at its fundamental root, what we see is technologies that really put the consumer in control, and that have lowered the barriers to entry for new entrants into media businesses. And so there's many good things that come about. I think that old line providers in the media industry have to really up their game, in particular as it comes to user interface, user experience, on-demand content, and things of that sort. What it hasn't changed in my mind is good content is still good content on any size screen or anywhere you want to see it, and bad content is still bad content, no matter if you can watch it on demand or anywhere you want to watch it. And so I think what's interesting is digital technology has transformed the delivery and the consumption of content, but I don't think that it has really changed the creative process or the cost of producing content.
So content is still king.
I think so.
All right. I don't mean that personally. Ivo, can you describe how Macedonia is positioning itself to succeed in this global information-based economy?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us over here today to this wonderful panel. I'd like to thank Mr. King for the question. Republic of Macedonia is a small country with 2.1 million people, landlocked country in the Balkans. And we, in 2006, when this government took in charge, we invested in information society as the one way to empower the citizens, one way to give our citizens a potential that can compete with the rest of the citizens of the European Union and the Western countries, because we don't have a lot of natural resources. We have our people, who is the most valuable resource for us, and we decided to invest in them. In the digital economy, where it's a very competitive economy, we decided to create a government who, by use of information and communication technology, will be more transparent, and it can empower the citizens by providing them with e-government services, and now the next step, the mobile government services, for them to spend more of their daily activities, to be more productive in their lives, to live a more productive, to spend more time with the family, versus spending countless hours on counters receiving administrative services. That is the difference between the old governments and the new governments. By using information communication technologies, and I'm in charge of Ministry of Information Society, who deals with information communication technologies, we added the administration on top of that because we are reforming the administration by letting them use ICT. And that is the power that you give to a modern society where, by using the information technologies of the 21st centuries, you can optimize the cost for running the governments, you can create new services, you can create better deliverables, and you get to the point where administration realizes that they're getting paid by the taxpayers' money. And if it's not the taxpayers, the administration will not have salary. So versus the citizens going to the administration, we created services where the services are going to the citizens. And we have come to this stage where the next stage with the mobile government, we can see that more services are being provided remotely. And with that, we hope that the citizens will spend more of their time focusing their business, focusing their families, and less time spending on counters.
Is this costly?
Costly. Of course, at the beginning it's costly, but when you calculate the hours that the average citizen spends in administration, when you calculate how much of his time he's spending there, if you calculate how much does it cost an average salary, then the return on investment is very quick.
Philippe, how are digital technologies abetting the work that UNESCO does?
Thank you, Larry, and good afternoon. Well, it's obviously an enormous accelerator for all our programs and what we do. You know here in Canada that UNESCO has been created by the UN after the Second World War to build the defenses of peace in the mind of men and women through education, culture, science, and free media communication. To give you a few examples, for instance, literacy of adults is still a huge problem in the world. 800 million adult people in the world cannot read or write today. 2/3 of them are women. Now, IT technologies, mobile phones are helping us. In Pakistan, in cooperation with private sector partners, we offer this technology that Pakistani women who have learned to read and write at school, but they need to practice in order not to forget about it, and they use their mobile phones in order to practice reading, writing, and keeping that knowledge. In another field, which is awareness raising globally for the cultural crimes. You all read in your newspapers what is happening in Mali, in Syria, where world heritage is destroyed every day. We raise awareness on that. And of course, again, mobile phones is an incredible tool at our disposal to try to contribute to that. We are now ready to send, if the Secretary General of the United Nations allows us, ready to send a mission in the field in Syria in order to create an alert mechanism so that when there is a distraction on the heritage of that country, which, by the way, will play such an important role once you have to start reconciliation in Syria, mobile phone will play a key role in order to spot, detect those cultural crimes and bring them to the attention of the world opinion. Another field is about the security of journalists. It's also a field where we are trying to work with partners, with media, with journalists, NGOs in the world in order to tackle that enormous problem. There are today about 100 journalists are killed every year because they do their work. And we are now at UNESCO the coordinator of United Nations Action Plan in order to tackle this issue, and also new technologies, mobile phone, will help us.
Is it hard to keep up with the technology?
It is hard to keep up, of course, because also we are a global organization. We are working with all countries in the world, and as we all know, the IT literacy is not the same in every country, so that is a challenge, yes.
By the way, we'll have questions for each and then a round robin as we go around, so I want to alert our people by satellite. I'm not forgetting you. We'll be coming to everybody. Nathan, most young technology entrepreneurs are trying to come up with the next Facebook, so what do you do to channel your energy into using technology to promote environmental conservation?
Thank you very much, Larry. First, I'd like to say how humbled I am to be one of the WSYA winners this year. It's a great pleasure to be here with you in Montreal, which is a lovely city. And so to answer your question, I am among a group of people who are social entrepreneurs. And when I started working for Afros, I was a hardcore gamer. I wanted to develop games that go boom and excite a lot of young people. But I was shown a new way where my games can inspire positive change in people, bring hope and change their mindsets so that they can improve and finally see and learn new things that they can through the mobile system that we have in Kenya and the penetration.
So the games always have meaning.
They do have meaning.
Unlike shooting birds.
Unlike shooting birds, we make games that discuss serious issues that we identify in the countries we're in. So some of the games we've done have dealt with child protection, gender-based violence, and environmental rights.
How did you get into this?
I met the founder, who is Kenyan but is based in South Africa, and she wanted to develop a game from Kenya. And so she met with me. I was running video game tournaments at the time, and she said, we're looking for a small team who can develop a game in Kenya. Would you be interested? I said, why not? So I went into the game design development team, and I got swept in what we call the Afro's way, which is the way of developing games, the mindset of actually going to the people that we're trying to affect and discussing with them what their issues are, and then developing a game to address those issues.
Mark Aboud, the managing director. Do I call it SAP or SAP? SAP is fine. Why is collaboration, Mark, so important in today's business environment?
Well, no company has the ultimate recipe for seeing what strategies will work in the future. So SAP's business is essentially helping companies become more competitive. And the real battle in that area is not so much running companies efficiently, but it's managing the information about the company in a better way. So, for example, you might recall a few years ago, Federal Express transformed their business on the premise that the information about the package was more important than the package. So its management of information is critical, and it's a collaboration of people around that information that drive better business decisions.
Is it working?
It's working when you try it. I mean, there's ways where like companies will come together, and it's bringing intellectual capital from diverse places to come together to create new strategies. And when you do that, you can create breakthrough strategies.
Brian David Johnson of Intel is a futurist. Over the past couple of decades, the rapid advances in computing power and interconnectivity have reshaped the world in many profound ways. What do you think are some of the most notable transformations in business and society to date, Brian?
Well, Larry, I think it's a great question. And really, when we look back, and one of my goals as a futurist is to come up with ideas and to come up with technologies that most people will think of as mundane when they arrive. So I think when we look back over the decades, I mean, quite honestly, I think there's two things that are transformed the planet, has transformed the geopolitical map, has transformed business. And that's, number one, the internet. I mean, the global connectivity. What global connectivity has allowed us to do is phenomenal, not only from a business standpoint, but from a communication standpoint. And then the second is computational power, the ever-shrinking size of computational power. I mean, you just think 20 years ago, the idea that most people would get on the internet with a device that's about this big would sounded like science fiction. And that idea that people just carry the internet in their pocket, they literally carry a gateway to global business, to global politics in their pocket, I think has had just a massive, massive effect on our global society. And even the way that science is done, the way that science was conducted globally before, the pace was much, much slower. Now science and the exchange of ideas happens internationally and instantaneously.
Did you, as a futurist, did you see all this coming?
Yes.
You did? Okay, since you did, what can you tell us about tomorrow?
I think tomorrow is going to be great. I mean, Larry, you'll find that I'm an optimist. I think that the future is going to be great because the future is built by people. And it's really up to us, and it's up to everybody who is in the auditorium today to understand that we build the future. And so what's coming is the size of meaningful computational power. So the size of the chip is going to continue to get smaller. And what that means is that we're going to be able to turn anything into a computer. And when we can turn anything into a computer, it changes the question. The question used to be, can we do it? Can we get a laptop small enough to fit in your pocket? You know, can we connect people all over the world? Well, when you can turn anything into a computer, what we ask ourselves changes. The question becomes what? What do we want to do? And that, I think, is really an amazing thing because it becomes about our aspiration, our imagination, and ultimately, how do we make the lives of people better?
Robert Kahn is the co-inventor of the Internet. As one of the key inventors, are you at all surprised by the rapid global adaptation of digital technologies, all the changes that have occurred since all of this started? Robert?
Yeah, well, I'm actually here in Barcelona, Larry, and thank you for hosting this event. Before I answer your question, I just wanted to say you probably can't see my image up there, but I'm here at the European Big Data Conference. And one of the features of this conference seems to be that the internet connectivity is not so good, so people won't be distracted from whatever else is going on at the conference. So that's why I'm here only in a telephone hookup. But with regard to your basic question, no, I'm not surprised at all because the progress of technology has been relentless. And I'm sure that the next few decades are going to introduce concepts that we're only barely able to grasp right now. The fact of the matter is that what's happened with the Internet itself is probably more surprising than what's happening with the underlying technology. And while technology tends to change from year to year, and since the invention of the development of the Internet started, we've probably gone through 3, 4, maybe 5 generations of technology. And what was there 40 years ago is no longer there, and yet the Internet architecture still persists. So that's really an amazing aspect of it, and I think it's due to the fact that the Internet itself is not a network. It's not a device. It's not any of the things that are part of the Internet, but rather it's this global information system that allows all of these components to be connected and ensures that the data flows to the right places and that it all works as an integral system. So that's one of the most unusual aspects about it. It's longevity, and I think it could probably last for another 40 years very easily.
We'll be coming back to you, Robert, but how the hell did you invent it?
It actually crept up on me. I was once asked a question at a lecture I gave at the National Academy in Washington by, I think it was the Intel Science Search, or maybe it was Westinghouse before that. I'm not sure. It was in the 90s sometime. This young lady who was about 15 years old got up and said she was the spokesperson for the audience, which must have been at least 1,000 young winners or finalists in this competition. And she said, I have one question to ask you, and that is, how did you get permission from all the governments of the world to go build the Internet? And I said, actually, we didn't need to because nobody thought it was a good idea at the time. So we just had completely free reign. But
Wow.
I think the reality is that we just started it as a research experiment to see if we could link machines and then to see if we could link different networks. We were creating the networks, we were creating the different systems, and this was really a research experiment that was sufficiently interesting that more researchers decided to join in, and eventually it spread around the world, and then eventually the U.S. government decided that a lot of its investments could be made open to the public. That was in the early 90s. You had the World Wide Web come along out of CERN. In fact, it just really exploded. I think, frankly, we were all a little surprised. I liked the comment of the previous speaker who said he could see it all very clearly. I used to give that as a, kind of a tongue-in-cheek answer as well, but only after I gave the more serious answer 6 or 8 times that obviously we couldn't really see that far ahead. But then it sounded much more interesting to just simply say, sure, we could tell that in 10 years it would be the devolution of the Bell system and the personal computer would be invented and that all of these things would take place. But it really wasn't that obvious back in the early 70s.
You're going to win a Nobel.
No, I think we're not eligible. I think there's some story, which I don't know if it's true or not, that Nobel's wife ran off with a mathematician, and therefore he said that no mathematician and computer science is viewed in that domain will ever be eligible for a Nobel Prize.
Yeah. It's perfectly understandable, by the way.
I don't know if it's true or not, or just a rumor.
Let's accept it. It's a great story.
Yeah?
Vivek Ranadive is founder and CEO of TIBCO, the leading independent provider of infrastructure software. You're the founder of a $1 billion real-time computing service. You left India at the age of 17, went to MIT when few other people from India were able to realize that dream. Tell us about your experience. How did this all happen for you?
Well, Larry, one of my heroes recently passed away, Neil Armstrong. In July 1969, I was a little boy growing up in Bombay, and I had my ear plastered to a little transistor radio, and I was listening to the moon landing, and I heard Armstrong utter the immortal words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And that turned out to be a pivotal moment in my own life. It was the moment at which I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to science and technology. And I was just amazed at who these people were. They were able to take a man, put him in a box, and send him to land on a rock 250,000 miles away. What ingenuity, what courage, what perseverance, what vision. So I wanted to be one of these people, and so a few years later I applied to MIT, and they made a mistake in the admissions process and admitted me, and pretty soon I found myself with $50 in my pocket on the shores of Boston at MIT. So that was the start of my journey, and what is truly amazing when you think about what they did in 1969 is that what you have in your pocket right now with your smartphone has more computing capacity than the entire NASA space program had back in 1969. And there's 1 billion people walking around the planet with this kind of computing capacity in their pocket. So just echoing the earlier speakers, there's so many things we can do. What problems can't we solve with that kind of computing capacity? And that's what my company is all about, is I believe if you get the right information to the right place at the right time, and you put it in the right context, then you can make the world a better place.
Wow. And our last panelist, and then we'll have lots of interchanges and questions, is Carlos Slim Domit, the chairman of the board of Telmex. Carlos, oh, by the way, I might add on a personal note, Carlos's father and I have started Aura TV. It's on the internet now. We're distributed by Hulu. We're a fast-growing company based in Southern California. I'm honored to be partnered with his father, and I think this is a really growing, it's great for me to be part of, with all I've done with radio and television, now to be part of the internet. So, Carlos, the question for you is, how have you positioned Telmex to succeed in a period of such intense technological changes?
Hello, Larry. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this Global ICT Congress. Well, Telmex was privatized in the late 90s, no, in the early 90s, sorry, in 1991. And it was, I think it was a process divided in three main steps. The first one was actualization. We had to update the infrastructure in a very big way. We have even electromechanical centrals, and the infrastructure was very unupdated. The secondly was to change the culture inside the company and to pass from a complaint company to a service company, working together with all the excellent team that Telmex has internally. And the third one was to understand the changes that was happening in this new era and try to put the strategy of the company to be able to provide all these new things that we're doing today. The key factor for achieving all of that was investment. It has been a process where in Mexico, in the last since '91, we have invested around $42 billion in all the infrastructure and all the development. And we're very clear that in this new era, that I believe is the era of access. It's access to people, it's access to organizations, private, public, academic, social, etc. And it's also the era of access for countries to reach better development and get a level field in the different social areas. We were very clear that all these, the information and telecommunication technologies are the nervous system of this new era and are the ones that allow all these changes to happen. So it's not only the process strategically for the company, but also the responsibility for giving the countries where we participate the ability to have this infrastructure to be able to have a better access to this new era.
Was it hard for the people around you to accept change?
I think it's a process that sometimes at the beginning is difficult, but as soon as you start reaching a trend of change and a trend of separation, it's something that becomes progressive. To give you a quick example, when we entered the company, the education average of the people was 5 years of school, and now it's close to 16 years of school, and that has been because of all the capacity, all the training process that has been put inside the company. So I think as the team evolves, also the company evolves, and it's a process that when you start these kind of changes, it becomes progressive and it never stops, especially in an era such as we are in information and telecommunications.
All right, now this is for everybody, and I'll swing around back and forth. We'll go to Kevin and go back and forth. Kevin, just a basic question. Where's it all going? What's tomorrow going to be like?
Well, it's humbling for me to listen to Philippe and Brian and Vivek talk about the very important social things that technology can bring about and the billion computers in people's hands. For me, I want to put the Kardashians in your pocket. And so if that's a social importance of where it's going, getting content and actually joking about that. But what we do find is real-time content, things like the Olympics, or it's astonishing the curve that you see in the adoption of mobile video. Every time there's a live event, the daredevil who jumped from the edge of space with a parachute a couple of weeks ago, there were 6 million views in Canada, simultaneous streams on mobile devices, and that was 3 times the biggest amount from the London Olympics just 3 months before. And so, where it's going, sometimes it's hard to draw curves that are as exponential in terms of the adoption of this technology. I think from a business person's standpoint, it's very exciting and it's very scary because business models are being created and they're being destroyed.
Mark, Aboud, from your standpoint, where's it going? Where's all this going?
Well, from a consumer standpoint, Larry, I think there's a lot of panelists who can predict what's going to come after the iPhone and the tablet better than I can. But I can tell you for business, business is following the consumer. So if you think about it, the consumer has all this great technology. They've got instant access to information. They've got mobile devices. They've got a great experience with their tablets, etc. When you move into business, they don't have any of that. So where business is going is where the consumer is. So as a business person, they say business people are people too. So business people need the same tools as consumers to do their job better, to make their companies more competitive. So in the business world, it's following the consumer.
Where, Ivo, from your standpoint, as a country, where's it going?
Well, from the point of the government, I can say that there are 5 steps of governments, and the most sophisticated government is what's called the connected government, based on the United Nations study. I think he will get to the point where all the government services are so connected they're in your pocket, and you will have reminders, you will have documents, everything will be electronic, everything will be digitalized. You will have your phone as ID, you will have your phone as a passport, you will have your phone as a driver license, and it will come to the point where services which are provided by government institutions will be instantaneous, and it will get to the point where you wouldn't even know that some of the services have actually been realized in your own benefit. Probably the transaction from your bank account will be automatically conducted for if you need a new passport, if you need a driver license, and it will be a 24-hour service every day of the week, 365 days of the year.
Brian, does any of this scare you?
Oh, none of this scares me at all, Larry. I think, for me, as I said, I'm an optimist. I mean, ultimately, for me, technology is just a tool. Technology is just a hammer. And a lot of times, human beings, we're really good at getting obsessed or enamored with our tools. But for me, I focus on the effect of those tools. I don't really focus on the hammer. I focus on the house that we can build with that hammer. And so for me, it's about the intent. I mean, what do we want to do with all this technology? I agree with what everybody's been saying, and the work that I do looking 10 to 15 years out shows us that we'll have more computational power, more computers, more connectivity, and this is all, and more data, certainly. And this is all a very good thing, but we have to ask ourselves, again, what do we want to do with it? Because we're reaching a point in time where science and technology have progressed to the point that we're only limited by our imagination. And that, for me, sort of takes me back to think, okay, so what do we want to do with it? And that's really on us. We are the people who will build the future. The future is built by the actions of people, and that's the intent. We have to sort of think about, all right, so how do we enrich people? How do we give people more stories? How do we connect people? How do we make us more sustainable? I think that's really the goal. The goal isn't the technology itself, but it's the effect that that technology can have on people.
Philippe, from UNESCO's standpoint, where do you think it's going?
We have a few years ago, a coalition was created with development partners called the Broadband Commission with the support of Mr. Carlos Slim. And last month in New York, the Broadband Commission and Carlos Slim and the Director General of UNESCO have launched a report about the progress of broadband in the world. The aim is to contribute to the efforts of developing governments in developing nations to provide more and more access to broadband technology. And the aim is to get 60% of the world's citizens connected by 2015. Now, there are success stories in the report. Broadband is progressing everywhere. There are also challenges, Larry, to answer your question. One of the challenges, cultural diversity. I mean, the new technologies could also facilitate a cultural monopoly on the web, and I don't think monopolies are good. They're not good in economy. They're also not good in culture. At the very essence of our human nature, there is the fact that we all have our language and our culture, and it is extremely important for the world. It's not only a question of pride, it's also a question of creativity. If we want to have more creative industries, more creativity, culture for development in the North, in the South, we also need perhaps more respect for minority languages on the net. And I will end with just these figures. You know, there are 70 languages on Facebook, about 300 on Wikipedia, but there are 6,000 languages in the world, and half of them are threatened. Every 2 weeks, one language dies. And so it is the Broadband Commission report also draws our attention on the fact that new technologies are also a tool to promote cultural diversity on the web.
Robert Kahn, you started it all. Where's it going?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's going where the creativity and innovation of mankind will take it. You can do a lot of linear projections in the near term. We clearly know broadband is going to be a component. We know mobility and wireless is going to be a component. Personally, I think the ability to manage information more effectively in the network environment is going to be a major component, and that's what this infrastructure conference here on big data that's about, that I'm attending and keynoting tomorrow here in Barcelona. But quite frankly, if you think about it in structural terms, it's almost like we have been living in this two-dimensional world for all of our history, so-called flatland, and suddenly with this issue of digital and connectivity and worldwide involvement, we've actually added another major dimension to the structure of the universe, and as we deal with it, and I think that's going to relate to the kinds of questions that we have to deal with in the future, whether they're questions about cybersecurity, whether they're questions about policies, privacy, and the like. The fact of the matter is I'm a fundamental optimist about the future, and that these new capabilities are ones that can be made to benefit society. But as an architect, I'm always looking at the upside and also the downside simultaneously, trying to understand how you can build into an architecture the mechanisms for minimizing things going wrong, maximizing the positive benefit. And I think we just need to be vigilant on that. So one of our challenges going forward will be to make sure that when you average out the pluses and the minuses over the future, that the pluses far outweigh the minuses.
Nathan, what about the future of games and all of this?
First, let me start by answering your question about where is it going. I think the question isn't where is it going, because that seems that we're taking a passive standpoint. It's where do you want to take technology? The Youth Awards invited 30 young people who will be doing presentations of where they're taking technology, and you can see them later. When you think of technology in this day and age, you sitting here has an option, has an opinion of where you want to take technology. For instance, we keep talking for the last 40 years of how we sent a man to the moon. And we go over and over on that story. But what if we, as a people, have come together and decided we wanted to go farther than the moon? It was us who let the ball drop and decided that we didn't want to go to Mars, or we didn't want to go beyond those borders, and as a people, let the moon be the limit. So for technology, where do you want to take it? It's up to you. For gaming, people think we're going to a virtualization format, which would be cool. I would love that. But I don't know. It's up to us to decide this is where we want to take technology and take it there.
Vivek, you wrote a book. Very well said. Vivek, you wrote a book, a major New York Times bestseller called The 2-Second Advantage. How are we going to cope with all this increasing speed, all the complexity of it all?
Well, Larry, you said earlier that content is king, but I think in the 21st century, context will be king. So you're absolutely right. There'll be more video content put on YouTube today than all of the content created by Hollywood in its entire history. So there is an exploding amount of data, and technology now exists to be able to put that in the right context. And it turns out that if you have a little bit of the right information, just a little bit of it beforehand, it's more valuable than all the information in the world 6 months after. So what's the point of knowing that you've lost a customer after the fact? What's the point of knowing that fraud is going to be committed when the money is gone, or that you're going to have a security threat when it's too late? And so that's really what the 2-second advantage is about. And so in terms of where it's all going, it's going to a better planet. It's going to a safer planet, a healthier planet. The data exists today to solve many of these problems. We can anticipate health issues. We can prevent pandemics. We can prevent food shortages, water shortages, security threats. So all of this information and the mobility that is now becoming a fact of life. It took 100 years for there to be 1 billion landline phones. It took 10 years for there to be 1 billion cell phones, and just 1 year for there to be 1 billion smart cell phones. So we are just in the first inning. My Giants are now in the World Series, so I'll use a baseball metaphor. We're just in the first inning of this process where we will start solving many of these problems over the next few years.
And for equal time, the Tigers are also in the World Series. Carlos, where do telecommunications companies go next? What kind of initiatives, innovations will your company do to succeed in the decades ahead? What about the world of telecommunications tomorrow?
Yes, well, first of all, is to continue improving the networks. Every time networks are going to demand more capacity and more speed. Also, to develop more infrastructure in terms of cloud infrastructure, where you can, through very big data centers, you can now not only host memory, but you can host applications, you can host software, you can host content, etc. So at the end, what we need to do is to give our customers the possibility to access anything they want, and to access also for the companies, the customers, or accessing the society as a general, to be able to deliver all this content and all these applications. So telecommunications and ICT as a whole industry will require not only to continue boosting very big investments, but also to continue improving every day, making this infrastructure not only more solid and more updated, but also more accessible to everyone. And for this, I think the new developments that we're seeing, like LTE or 4G networks in mobile, or getting the fiber closer to the home, is going to allow that, I believe, for the next year, to have a very strong boost in connectivity, and also to have a strong boost in the infrastructure capacity to hold all that content and develop all the new services that people, companies, and organizations are going to need to be able to host all this amount of data and be able to access it in a very efficient way.
Where does South America? What role does it play in this, Carlos? Do you think Central and South American countries are going to take full advantage of this digital revolution?
Definitely, Larry. I think that the opportunity that this new era is offering to countries that are developing is to equal a lot of the opportunities. I'm going to give you an example. We are on the first generation only of all this new era that we're living. Today, a kid in the most pure community in some rural area with a connectivity and with a broadband connectivity may have access to the same information to a kid in one of the best schools in the world. So this capacity through connection to equal opportunities for people is going to be very important. Another thing that digital education could have is that it can be massive, much faster than the physical education. It can be adequate to what the jobs are demanding. So the specialties that we may have in digital education will be unlimited in terms of what people should or could specialize to. The other is that we are entering an era in education that memory is going to weigh less than thinking. We will have so much information at our hands that the education in our generation was very close memory, not to remember many things and to study many things. Today, this process of digital education is going to help us get more time to develop more practical abilities for everyone, equal access to information to everyone, and what in the old era would maybe take 1 or 2 generations to accomplish, this may take, if we take the right decisions, less than half generation to equal, for example, in education. And the same happens in health, in job development, no, for people that want to hire themselves as persons, and also for new companies that, as we are seeing, are getting invented every time.
Well, everything is so upbeat. So, Kevin, what scares you? Is there a downer here? Does anything frighten you?
I guess one of the things that scare me is all these new business models are using advertising as the justification, as the revenue source, and it seems like so many of the new digital technologies and digital business models are go out and get 100 million people or 1 billion people to sign up and use your product. Don't have a business model and then augment it with advertising. And I kind of just wish everybody would let the media companies have advertising for a while. So I do think the ad model is changing, and I think that digital technology is making it so that we talked about privacy. I heard that come up from a number of speakers, and I think it's inevitable that much more targeting and much more personalized advertising is going to evolve, is going to emerge. It's going to be through maybe opt-in models, or it's going to be Hulu in the U.S. is doing an interesting model where you can actually select your ad from a number of choices of ads.
Including mine.
And so I think that targeted advertising, and one of the downsides of the advertising in the traditional media world is you don't get good return on investment metrics. You don't get good measurement of the performance. And I think digital content allows you to get a lot more metrics on performance.
Mark, what scares you, if anything?
Well, Larry, I would say from a Canadian perspective, what scares me is Canada not keeping pace with the global economy. So we talked about, some of the panelists talked about complexity. The world is becoming more and more complex, and we have to simplify complexity for people, we have to simplify complexity for business, or get left behind. And I would say that Canada's investment in technology and those kinds of things that tame complexity is falling behind, and we see our productivity falling. So what scares me is, from a Canadian perspective, Canada taking its place in the world by making the right investments.
Is that a government responsibility?
No, it's the responsibility of business leaders across the country. I think Canadian government have, for the most part, created a good tax environment for business, but business leaders, and we see it all the time, need to step up. But really the big question here is stepping up fast enough. So businesses are investing, but are you investing fast enough to stay ahead of your competition is the real question.
Ivo, what scares you?
Well, from a government perspective, I think what scares me is that some governments could over-regulate things. There is one issue that we have seen in governments trying to do one good thing. By over-regulating, they can kill the whole market. And what the government of the Republic of Macedonia has done since 2006 is created a policy regulation which has been competitive by introducing flat taxes. We have 10% corporate tax. We have been able to attract a lot of foreign direct investments. We have been able to provide services for the citizens to increase the ICT literacy rate, the index that we've done. We have a computer for every child where the student-to-computer ratio from first grade to 12th grade is 1.4 to 1. We're not there yet 1 to 1. But we are doing regulations in order to create a market economy for the benefit of the citizens.
You have to have regulation, though.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have regulation because you have to, in one way, to protect the citizens, not to be abused by some of the private sector, especially when you have old systems, when you have monopoly or duopolies. What we have done in the communication sector has been wonderful success stories by introducing a liberalized telecommunication legislation. It has been a booming sector for us, and it is very important right now. End of the year, there is a big conference in Dubai for the new ITRs. Mr. Carlos Slim is very much aware of that, and his father, who is a chairman of the Broadband Commission, I'm part of the Broadband Commission as the commissioner. It is a big decision that is going to be decided, and again, over-regulating sometimes can kill successful markets.
Do you want to say something, Kevin?
I do. Thanks, Larry. I think Ivo makes a fantastic point. There's no question that regulation is required, but as Mark says, you know, there's a lot of capital required for these new technologies. There's a lot of risk capital that's required by individuals and by companies to either invest in infrastructure or to invest in trial and error. And it's never been more important that there's be regulatory certainty. So businesses need to understand the regulatory landscape, and it needs to be consistent. It needs to be applied fairly and symmetrically. And regulators, this is a challenge. I think historically, in my experience, regulators haven't been good futurists. And regulators need to look with binoculars, not with a rearview mirror. And my experience tells me that that's a big challenge.
Since you mentioned futurists, Brian, you're a futurist since you can see tomorrow. What scares you?
Well, Larry, I think what scares me most, to be honest, is fear. Fear is an incredibly powerful thing. Even the new brain imaging has shown us that our brain on fear operates really differently. And when we're frightened, we can basically make one of three decisions. It's fight, flight, or freeze. So when we're fearful, we make very, very bad decisions. And I think a lot of this talk about technology and a lot of the talk about where things are going, to be quite honest, does scare a lot of people. But this to me I'm very worried about that because, again, we make very bad purchasing decisions. We make very bad policy decisions when we operate from a sense of fear. And so one of the things that I push for, again, being an optimist and spending most of my days 10 to 15 years into the future, is thinking about how do we get an understanding of what we should be afraid of and what we shouldn't be afraid of. And I'll give you an example, to be very specific. You hear us, and even on the panel today, people have talked about privacy. We talk about privacy as if it's a thing, right? As if it's like an element that lives on the periodic table somewhere near helium. But the fact of the matter is, privacy is a social construct. Privacy in Canada is different than privacy in the European Union, is different than privacy in China. So we need to embrace the fact that it is much, much more complicated, and that we need to understand that it's much more human, it's much more of a regulatory and a cultural construct, and understand the human impact of these fears, that it's not a technology thing or an issue, that we sort of embrace the things that we are frightened of and then go and fix them.
Philippe, what scares you? What troubles you?
Well, someone mentioned the important role of information technologies to make the world a better place. And we all know that inequalities are growing fast in the world. Now, our answer to that in the UN systems are the Millennium Development Goals, trying to work with developing nations in order to make the world a better place. And there are success stories, but there are also challenges. Education, for instance. The Millennium Development Goal of education is to put every child in primary school by 2015. We have been quite successful, and all partners, including the private sector, have been quite successful during the 10 first years. From 2000 to 2010, about 50% of these kids who were out of school have been introduced in the school system. But since 2010, progress has stalled. We still have 60 million children today which are out of school, and it's not progressing anymore. So how can information technologies help all of us to contribute to that and make sure that all children can go to school? And this is, for me, one of the big added value of a meeting like this one, is to have successful entrepreneurs, civil society practitioners, governments, UN system, trying to learn from each other and see how we can perhaps partner better for in the future towards more development and less inequalities in the world.
Robert, what concerns Robert Kahn?
Well, I think the essential attribute of digital technology and the internet in particular is that it's become an integral part of the life of just about everybody on the planet that's been exposed to it. In some countries of the world, in fact, it has become such an important part of their life, like, for example, the use of cell phones in some of the underdeveloped countries, that people would literally give up medical care or sometimes food just in return for having good connectivity with a mobile device, because that's their lifeline to the rest of the world. And given that it's so crucial, the thing that I think we've all learned from electricity when it goes out is that when you don't have something that's critical to you, it is completely disruptive to what goes on. So I think that's my biggest concern, whether it's cybersecurity to try and take out fundamental services, or just the inability of different organizations to provide reliable enough service to meet the real demands of the population. That would be my biggest concern. I agree with all the other suggestions that people have put forth, whether it's over-regulation or privacy or whatever, but the one that really bothers me the most is the potential that we might be denied what's become an essential part of our society.
Nathan, you're the youngest member of the group. What concerns you?
There was a story that someone shared with me, and it's about a man who lived in a nice neighborhood. And one day, a new neighbor moved into the house next door. And his friends and other neighbors would come to him and tell him, that neighbor of yours, the new one, he's a terrible man. Oh my God, he's so mean. He's bad. If you ever ask him for anything, he'll just refuse you and he won't do anything, just ignore him. And he kept on hearing this message. And one day, his wife got on his case because she wanted him to mow the lawn. And his lawnmower was damaged, but he knew his new neighbor had a lawnmower, and so he had no other choice but to go to his neighbor to try and borrow the lawnmower. And as he walked from his house to his neighbor's house, the negative things that were shared with him from his friends, from his other neighbors, about this man being mean, about him denying to help you and all that, went on and on and on around in his mind. And finally, when he arrived at the neighbor's door and knocked, waited, and finally the neighbor opened the door, what he said was, "You know what? Just keep your lawnmower," and walked away. What I fear is that us young entrepreneurs, we're the new neighbor. Where we've moved into the street of entrepreneurial decision-making, and the status quo won't allow us to express ourselves. No one is giving us a chance because they've had bad things about young entrepreneurs. They've had bad experiences from other young entrepreneurs. And so the attitude we already receive when coming to approach these companies is a negative attitude. And that's what I fear. And I hope it changes soon.
Vivek, what concerns you? Good story.
Sitting in Silicon Valley, we tend to be optimists, and we kind of believe in the church of technology. And so most fears are really opportunities for us, but overzealous politicians is probably the greatest fear. Overregulation, not investing in education, starting trade wars, starting gun wars. I think we live at a time where most of these problems can be solved if you let people do it. Even with regard to education, MIT, Harvard, Stanford are now offering their courses online. So you could be in a slum in Africa or in Bombay, and you could have access to a world-class education if you have a web connection. So I think for every fear, there's an opportunity, and I think that if we just let things take their course, most of these fears can be overcome.
And Carlos, what concerns you? What fears do you have about all of this?
Yes, Larry, thank you. First of all, in the regulation side, I believe that regulators should have few objectives, very big but few, and then encourage all the regulation to accomplish these objectives. In Mexico, we have the two objectives that the country has is coverage, competition, and convergence. All of them require a lot of investment. So the regulations here must address all of these points. So is how to encourage investments. With that investment, how to get coverage to all society, and then use the networks to get all the services so people can have access to better, more, and cheaper contents and cheaper and better applications. What concerns me is that we're living on a difficult stage, economically speaking, in the world, especially countries like Europe, no, U.S. is not growing as fast. The unemployment rates are very high, especially in young people. And I think my main concern is that if the regulation doesn't become pragmatical to address few objectives like the one I mentioned, this development on information and telecommunications industry can deaccelerate instead to become an alternative to help put solutions to all the big problems that we're seeing in so many places. So my main concern would be that we lose speed and technology, instead of become one of the factors to address all the problems that we're living and help them recover faster, that instead of that, we lose speed on the development on the industry.
All right. Is everyone here, Kevin, are you optimistic about all this? Is everyone here an optimist?
Well, after I hear Nathan speak, I'm very optimistic about our future.
He's the future, right? Is anyone here pessimistic? Everyone here is optimistic.
Yep, optimistic.
Would, I hate to get political here, but we're in the midst of a heavy election race in the United States. Would a war throw this, Ivo? What would happen if a war broke? What a third world war? What would that do to all of this?
Well, I think we
God
are
forbid.
all aware that the next wars will be in the cyberspace. They're using the new technologies. The governments are already, one way or another, trying to get into the data of other governments and trying to prevent or trying to act upon some information that they have. So the power of the future, the power of the digital era that we live in today, is that the power is in every citizen who is connected on this planet. That's the beauty of the broadband, that's the beauty of the internet, that's what Rob Kahn and Vint Cerf founded. They're giving us a tool to eliminate geographical barriers. They're giving us a tool to be digitally included, not to be excluded. And that is what we should continue to do. Keep using these tools. I believe that it's a great tomorrow. Nathan mentioned this. I've seen wonderful applications who are winners today with the World Youth Awards. I think there'll be a gala tonight. And if we continue by investing in the future, and Dan Tapscott, in one of his books, mentioned that if you can read the minds of the youth, if you can understand them, you can predict the future.
Speaking of that, Brian, what can you tell us definitely will happen in the future? What do you know is going to happen? Peep into that crystal ball.
So one of the things that we've been seeing, and specifically it's my job to help build the chips about 10 years in the future, and that's literally what I'm working on today. So the thing that we do know is that we're going to have more computers. We're going to have more computational power. This is the things that we've kind of talked about already. We know that. But the thing that I'm really excited about and that we're beginning to see is when all these things come together. So when you've got all these really smart computers, okay, that's great. You've got all the kind of connectivity out there so you can connect them together, okay, that's great. And then you've got the smart, sort of the intelligence, the software. When you put all those things together, what that means is that computers and computational power can begin to understand us on a very personal level. Literally, all of my devices can understand me, Brian, and you, Larry. It can understand your smartphone will know you specifically. And this allows us to do really amazing things. And I'll give you an example around healthcare. So there's some very early trials going on right now with the U.S. military where they're using smartphones to actually treat post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's a terrible disease that robs the people's lives of these soldiers sort of coming back from war. And the problem with this disease is that you need to be monitored and need to sort of be in touch and be talking with people constantly. And the healthcare system and even families can't do that. But what can do that is this, that if you have your smartphone, if you have these technologies around you, it can see who you're talking to, who you're not talking to. It even knows where you're surfing and also maybe even the music that you're listening to. And then it can become a lifeline. So all this computational power, all the things that we've been talking about, can actually reach out to the healthcare system, or can reach out to family members and say, hey, well, maybe you should go and talk to this soldier because they're not doing so well. And this is ways that we can use all of this technology to really fundamentally make people's lives better. And then, Larry, one last thing that I do have to tell you that people have talked about a little bit, the thing that I'm really excited about is innovation. Now, and what I mean by that is for years and years and years, you hear companies and countries talk about innovation. But when you've got this in your pocket, when you've got a tablet, when you've got a laptop, and you've got connectivity, it means the innovation starts to come from places where we had never seen it before. I mean, for a long time, we've seen it sort of in Western countries, and we've seen it in Europe and in Asia. But I spend most of my time outside of the United States, outside of North America, sort of looking for instances of the future. And I found just incredible innovation, things that are happening in South America, in Brazil, really interesting things coming out of Mumbai, India. And because of the internet and because of this computational power, it's giving us very different types of innovation from all over the world.
Wow. Yeah, this is so impressive to me. It's also a little bit mind-boggling. Robert, I know you're very optimistic as obviously you are, as the co-inventor of the internet. Are we always going to need, though, human contact? I hope we don't lose the fact that we still need people to people. Are people going to marry by text message? Are we going to have intercourse by oblivion? Are we going to do away with sex?
Yeah, I sure hope that people contact will be pervasive. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, at this conference I'm at here, they purposely have sort of downplayed the internet capability, either by limiting the bandwidth or whatever, just to make sure that it doesn't distract people from the people-to-people aspects of this particular conference. But, while I'm an optimist, I'm also aware that things can go wrong. And, you know that old adage, it goes something like, how do you keep them down on the farm? Once I'd seen Paris. We are now in this, I don't know whether it's 3 or 4 or 5-dimensional world, but if you take the 3-dimensional analog, if this capability were to be cut off, we'd be back in flatland. So we would be forced to be back on the farm, even though we know there's something better. And I think that's one of the things we have to be vigilant about, because in a conflict situation where there are really adverse forces working against each other, that kind of thing, in fact, is possible to happen. And we need to be prepared for it, need to know how to deal with it. But other than being prepared and taking the necessary precautions and being vigilant, I am very optimistic that this technology will evolve to serve us all extremely well in the future.
A couple of other quick things. Carlos, South America and Central America, are they taking full advantage of the digital revolution?
Yes, I mean, I think that the developments that we're seeing are coming fast. Every country has a different strategy. And what is common in all of them is this encouragement of continue fostering investments in all the different areas. Examples like Brazil, to give you one, that has already connected 27,000 public schools, and that is the sales of computers past the sales of TV sets since 4 years ago. So you see this trend of developing faster in all the countries. And also what happened is that you are jumping stages, and that is going to allow to move faster on a level field as we were talking before.
Gentlemen, I don't know what to say, except I think this has been very illuminating. And before we thank our guests, I heard a joke the other day, and I might end this on a little humorous note. Someone mentioned how Robert can't win the Nobel Prize because of what happened to Mr. Nobel with his wife. So it reminded me of a joke I heard. You're never supposed to say a joke is funny before you tell it, because if you don't laugh, I'm going to look like an idiot. But it's a funny joke. There's a train that goes every night from New York to Chicago. It leaves New York at 9 o'clock. It arrives in Chicago at 8 in the morning. It's an all-Pullman train, all sleeper. A man checks into his compartment. He's ready for the trip. And suddenly the door opens and a woman comes in. And she's going to have to share that bedroom compartment with him for the night. Now, normally, Amtrak, the train company, would not rent a room to a single woman with a woman with a man not married to each other for the evening, but the train was sold out and the woman had to make the trip, and she said, I'll do it. So she comes into the compartment. The man goes into the upper bed, the woman goes into the lower bed, and the train begins its trek to Chicago. After a little while, the man leans forward and says, I'm a little chilled. Ma'am, could I borrow a blanket? The woman looks up and says, you know, we're only going to be on this train for one night. We're never going to see each other again after tonight. Why not, just for tonight, why don't we play man and wife? You and me for the next 8 hours, man and wife on this train. The guy says, sure. She says, good, get your own goddamn blanket. Thank our panel. Thank you all very much. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone involved. Thank you.